Welcome, and thank you for joining us on World Lion Day. Um, uh, it's your support for the Lion Recovery Fund has been truly amazing, and we're really delighted to have you here with us. I'm Zhizhe Kolo, I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Wildlife Conservation Network, and I just wanted to share the story of the first time I ever heard lions. I was camping out in Botswana, and suddenly I heard this noise that I'd never heard before, and it wasn't what I expected lions to sound like. And yet it marked me. It was this very deep, primal, guttural sound. And my friend with whom I was camping said that there were lions, and I was like, oh, this is really, really amazing. Didn't see them, went to sleep that night, and woke up the next morning, and there were lion paw prints all over the campground and around my tent. It was really, really humbling, and we finally saw them a few days later, and it was truly special. Lions really embody something majestic. They embody not just the idea of wild Africa, but as the apex predator, they really represent the health of their ecosystems. And sadly, over the past 25 years, well, we've lost half of the world's lion population. And with about 20,000 lions left in the world today, that's about just as much as a quarter of what would a Taylor Swift concert fill. So that's not that many lions left. And lions aren't easy neighbors in a world where space for coexistence is increasingly limited, but they're really an essential neighbor for a healthy planet. So the mission of the Wildlife Conservation Network is to protect endangered wildlife by supporting conservationists who ensure that people and wildlife coexist and thrive. And we do so through three strategies: investing in local conservation organizations, in our partners network, investing in local individual rising wildlife leaders, and investing in a managed portfolio of projects through wildlife funds to protect a particular species across the entire range. One of these wildlife funds is the Lion Recovery Fund, which we launched in 2017, and which, thanks to your generosities, raised to date almost $34 million, with 100% of those funds go into projects on the ground. This pooled funding mechanism really enables your contribution of any size, from $100 to $1 million, to have the greatest impact, with our team identifying, vetting, and supporting outstanding projects from organizations that are poised for success. We could not achieve what we do without your trust and your support. So thank you so much for what you've given us and for your ongoing partnership. We really value transparency to share with you the impact that this partnership with us has had for lions. So today, we're joined with two special guests to share their experiences protecting lions. Our director of the Lion Recovery Fund, Dr. Peter Lindsay from Zimbabwe, but who roams all around Africa. Peter is one of the most passionate and knowledgeable conservationists I know, with more than 20 years of experience helping foster collaborations for the protection of healthy and wild landscapes. I think probably his only downfall to me is that he seems to prefer cricket over proper football, or soccer as Americans call it. But I'll look over that. And I'm also really delighted to welcome Michael Kalo, Chief Community Officer from the Kenya Wildlife Trust, which is one of the more than 80 grantees of the Lion Recovery Fund. So I'll let Peter introduce Michael after he gives you an overview of the Lion Recovery Fund, and we'll get a real special look at the impressive work of the Kenya Wildlife Trust. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Zhizhe. And hello, everyone. Yeah, it's good to be here. Really appreciate you all making the efforts to attend. And also, of course, a huge thank you to every single one of you who've supported the Lion Recovery Fund. We could do none of this without you. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to present some of the work that we're trying to do, and also to kind of co-host this presentation with Michael, who's a really impressive conservationist. So just a reminder as to why we're doing this with the Lion Recovery Fund. So as Zhizhe alluded, the number of lions have declined by about half between, for example, between the release of the first Lion King movie and the second Lion King movie. Lion numbers declined by about half. So it was really poignant that on the release of the second Lion King movie, we had the opportunity to partner with Disney around their Protect the Pride campaign, which helped to significantly bolster the Lion Recovery Fund. So on the slide here is the estimated pre-colonial lion distribution. Of course, it's pretty much an estimate, but we believe they occupied pretty much all of the kind of savanna habitat in Africa. This is the current distribution. So look at the dark green. That's where we know for sure that lions still exist. And there are some figures on the screen there that could tell you all you need to know. But as you can tell, the lion range is becoming significantly more fragmented. And if you even look at a map from, say, the early 2000s compared to this one, the fragmentation is very visible. So there's a real urgency around this. The Lion Recovery Fund was formed in 2017. Scarily, this is our 7th year of operation now. It was initially formed as a collaboration between Wildlife Conservation Network and the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation, who did amazing work in terms of helping us launch. And the way it works is we, in the beginning, and being tweaked along the way to gradually improve it, we developed a science-based conservation strategy. And then my job as the director of the Lion Recovery Fund is to find projects around Africa that fit the strategy. And then I will invite a proposal that's then reviewed by a kind of professional granting committee with diversified experience around the continent. And then they decide if that project is to be funded or not. The LRF is funded by a wide diversity of donors, from private individuals to philanthropists, foundations, corporations, etc. And then we take 100% of the funds raised and we invest in the best ideas for conserving lions, their habitats, and their prey. So already the LRF has got a really significant footprint. You can see on this, there's a lot going on this slide. You might recognize this is from our infographic. You can see that the Lion Recovery Fund is continental in scope. And what we do is we pool funds from a variety of sources. So even the smallest donations, because they're pooled from so many sources, can really contribute in a very efficient way to helping lion conservation. So far, we've granted out $32.8 million across 80 different conservation groups across 23 different countries. And here's a few sort of general metrics. I'm not going to bore you by reading them out, but have a look at our infographic. I think some of the significant ones are the fact that our grantees have averted 220 or so lion killings by angry pastoralists and rescued 71 lions alive from snares. And also the Lion Recovery Fund funding contributes to the employment of a tremendous number of conservationists out there, which we're very proud of. So I'm going to talk to you now about some of the themes of LRF granting. The LRF is big, it's dense, it takes a lot of unpacking. I'm not going to talk about all of the work we do, but talk about some of the key themes. And one of them is something that we're putting more and more effort in, is save the endangered northern lion subspecies. There are two subspecies, one that occurs kind of north of the equator, and then one that occurs in southern and East Africa, which is generally doing better. The northern lion subspecies is endangered, and the West African clade of that subspecies is critically endangered. And there are actually only 4 populations of lions remaining in West Africa. 2 of them, both in Nigeria, are on the very edge of extinction. And then the biggest remaining population is in the so-called WAP complex, which is on the border of Benin, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Now, that's a very unstable region. And so the biggest West African lion population is in real jeopardy. We're supporting African parks who are in the Beninese side of the WAP complex. They have a desire to move into sport management in the other 2 countries as well, but the political instability at the moment precludes that. But we're really putting a lot of resources to help them secure the lions there. And then in Senegal, we are supporting one of our first ever grantees was Panthera in Niokolo-Koba National Park. And those guys are doing fantastic work at supporting the work of the Senegalese authorities to manage Niokolo-Koba National Park. When they started, there was perhaps as many as just as few as 10 lions remaining. And by now, those numbers are up to 30. And so they captured this beautiful video of cubs in that reserve just this last week. And so, really exciting evidence of improvement. That protected area also includes West Africa's largest leopard population, the only remaining population of West African Lord Derby eland, the biggest population the only remaining population of wild dogs in West Africa, etc. So it's a critically important landscape. And given the vulnerability of lions elsewhere in West Africa, it's taken on incredibly important proportions. Before moving on to this next topic, on the topic of the northern lion, one thing that the LRF is well positioned to do is to convene and bring actors together, because we don't do conservation action ourselves. We're a funder, and we're well positioned to bring our grantees together. And so we've been working to bring the actors working on the conservation of the northern lion together to see how they can best collaborate, and kind of 1 + 1 = 3 kind of scenario, to make sure that their efforts are redoubled, they're more collaborative, they're more coordinated, and together hopefully can raise more funding. So related to the conservation of the northern lion subspecies is a topic I'm more passionate about than anything, and that is securing Africa's wildest spaces. So any of you who've spoken to me or know me will know that I think my biggest passion is getting conservation investment in conservation landscapes that are really neglected. There are certain parts of Africa that, by fortune of circumstance, or have very low human population densities. I say fortune from a nature perspective. And then there are other places where governments have been far-sighted enough to proclaim particularly large protected areas. And so there are a few places on the continent that remain incredibly wild. And so we're trying really hard to support conservation actors to save these areas or keep them wild. So a good area, a good example of this is in eastern South Sudan. You can see the little maps in the insert. So there we're supporting African parks, again, who are supporting the South Sudanese government for the management of Boma and Bandingalo national parks and some of the areas in between. And that's an incredibly exciting area because, firstly, there are a lot more lions remaining there than we ever thought there would be, which is incredibly exciting. Because normally, if there hasn't been much conservation attention in a given area, then when you get there, there are very few, if any, lions remaining. That's not the case in the Eastern CAR. There's quite a lot of lions. And there's also probably the world's largest migration of wild ungulates. You're going to hear more about this in the press soon. This is the main species. There are 4 migratory species. This is white-eared cob, and then topi, or also in southern Africa, they're known as tsesebe, West Africa, corrigum, but in East Africa, they're known as topi, and there are huge numbers of them. And it's an absolutely magnificent landscape. So we've been supporting African parks to establish a management presence there, and also collaring the migratory animals and the lions to better understand how they move and use the landscape so they can better protect them. Another very wild landscape is Western South Sudan. So South Sudan itself, as a country in general, has a lot of very wild places. There's an enormous national park in the west called Southern National Park. It's 23,000 square km or so. So that's, 2.5 times the size of Yellowstone. And we're supporting the work of Fauna and Flora International there. And we took a leap of faith because we didn't know for sure that there were lions there, but we knew there must be. The rangers said they were sure there were. The communities there said they're sure there were. But it took Fauna and Flora about a couple of years, 18 months to 2 years, to actually prove the presence of lions. So there was cause of great celebration last year when they got their first camera trap photo of a lion. And then this year, recently, they got a beautiful series of camera trap photos of breeding pride of lions. So it's super exciting. And because the park is so big, the potential for recovery there is really, really exciting. Another very wild area is Northern Central African Republic. So there we're supporting the efforts of Wildlife Conservation Society. And by the way, when I mentioned the NGOs, I never want to underplay the importance of the role of the national governments. So you take that as a given for all of these examples. Anyway, Wildlife Conservation Society work in Bamingi Bangara National Park and Manovo Wildest in Flores. And until relatively recently, these parks had some of the most dense wildlife populations in the whole of Africa, but have been severely affected by the civil unrest that's gone on in that part of Africa. So the wildlife is depleted, but there's still wildlife there in enough numbers to recover, and there are lions. And so the WCS team camera trapped these 2 beautiful males there recently, and as a result, there's real potential again for lion recovery because these landscapes are really enormous. The WCS have got a mandate to manage 100,000 square kilometers, so that's, I don't know, my maths is not very good, but let's say 12 times the size of Yellowstone. It's enormous. Southern Chad, which is actually just adjacent to Northern Central African Republic, is also super wild area. There's a massive complex of protected areas there centered around Zakuma National Park, one of the most beautiful parks in Africa. I would really suggest that you try and go there if you can. There's tourism facilities there, which is unusual for some of these very wild places. And there's a significant lion population there in Zakuma. And African parks, with LRF support, of course, it takes much more than just our support, but we're contributing to the extent that we can to help them expand their management footprint across an area of about 27,000 square kilometers. That's 3 times the size of Yellowstone. And then hopefully help lions to recover across the whole landscape, and indeed into northern CAR. And then the big daddy of wild places in Africa is Eastern Central African Republic. So you've probably heard me speaking about Chinko before. There's an area in Eastern Central African Republic and adjacent countries of nearly 200,000 square kilometers. I think that's about the size of Tennessee, with almost no human settlement at all. Vast wild places with there's a mixture of savanna and tropical forest there, so it's hyper biodiverse with this incredible mixture of biodiversity. And also we're not super sure how many lions, but probably at least 180, but with huge potential to recover. African parks are working there, and they're managing about 60,000 square kilometers of that huge landscape, and it's one of our biggest investment sites. Another really wild place is northern Mozambique. So some of you will have heard Colleen Begg speak about this. She's a WCN partner, the Niassa Lion Project. She does absolutely incredible work there, supporting the various concessionaires that work in, or at least a good proportion of them that work in Niassa Special Reserve, helping them to strengthen their management and protection and anti-poaching and community work, and help protect the largest lion population in Mozambique. There's at least 800 lions there, we think. So it's a critically important landscape and also one of the most beautiful parts of Africa. Absolutely stunning landscape, as you can see. Another very wild place which is adjacent to Niassa, is southern Tanzania. So there you have the iconic Selous Game Reserve, and 2/3 of which has now been regazetted as a national park. Nyerere National Park, after the first president of Tanzania, who was an environmental visionary in his own right. And there's a very important lion population remaining, and we're supporting the efforts of Frankfurt Zoological Society to support TANAPA and TAWA, the wildlife authorities, to manage those protected areas. And we support lion landscapes to do to work with the communities around the edges and to do lion surveys. And then in Western Tanzania, there's a massive complex of protected areas again. And there we're supporting a locally led grassroots conservation organization run by an indigenous Tanzanian, Jonathan Kuyega, Jonathan Kuyega, I must speak more slowly, who is a very impressive emerging conservationist who does really important work with the local communities there to tackle human-lion conflict and to reduce ritual killing of lions. And so we're very happy to support his work. I think this is the last of the wild places that I'm going to mention in this talk, but the Kafue ecosystem of Western Zambia is another incredibly wild and stunning area. The Zambian government has set aside an enormous 66,000 square kilometers, which I guess that's 7 times the size of Yellowstone. And we support a series of different NGOs in that landscape, including Panthera and others, Mosekesi, Game Rangers International, and yeah, there are more. Have a mental block, but we're supporting some fantastic work there. There's a lot of great collaborations going on. Zambia Carnivore Program, that's the other one. I knew it. A lot of really effective NGOs working in a very collaborative, coordinated sense, and there's evidence now that lion populations and wildlife populations in general are starting to recover in response to the amazing conservation work that's been done there. And because it's such a big landscape, the recovery potential is enormous. So super exciting. Another theme, so moving on the theme of conserving lions in wild places, another one is pursuing lion reintroductions where possible. So it's not possible very often, but where there is a possibility, we try and support it. So these lions were taken in, this photo was taken in the Zambezi Delta of Mozambique, which is one of Africa's least known and most stunning wildlife areas. They introduced 24 lions there about 4 years ago, and there's about 90 of them already. They're absolutely flourishing. We are also supporting a lion reintroduction into Bateki National Park in Gabon. That's in the works. We supported a lion reintroduction in Malawi. And we supported a feasibility study for the reintroduction of lions into Iona National Park in southern Angola. So wherever this reintroducing lions is a possibility, will be key to support it. The LRF, it's important to note, is not just about lions. This is really important to me personally, and I think in terms of the impact of the fund, it's about helping to protect and manage landscapes and the community engagement, the landscape protection and management. And that means the investments we make are invariably about much more than just lions. And two good examples of species that benefit from our investments are cheetahs and wild dogs. For example, we're investing in over a third of wild dog range, including in some of the places where they're the most threatened. So from a wild dog conservation perspective, the Lion Recovery Fund is quite a significant actor, also for cheetahs. So I've spoken a lot about some of these very wild places, but it's important to note, Africa is increasingly populous, and lions occur in some very busy parts of the continent as well. And so promoting coexistence between people and lions becomes increasingly important. In 2019, around the Protect the Pride campaign, the partnership with Disney, we convened and brought a number of conservation actors together. And there the conservationists present came up with some declarations that they felt were critical if we are to succeed at conserving lions. The first was to stop the loss, that is to stop the loss of lions, their habitats and their prey. Reduce the costs, that is to reduce the cost that local people bear from living with lions. Lions, as Gigi alluded to, are not an easy species to live with. They readily eat livestock. They can be a threat to human life, but there are solutions to promote coexistence, absolutely. And so one of the solutions, as we'll hear from Michael, is to hire local people to act as lion guardians or lion ambassadors or lion rangers or whatever the term is, that each project heads have their own term. And in this case, this is Ngorongoro. Young men from the affected communities affected by human lion conflict are hired, and they act as a liaison between the conservation organization and the pastoralists. They promote improved livestock husbandry. They respond to conflict incidences. They help to strengthen livestock corrals like this one. This is a photograph from Zimbabwe. This is the project of the very impressive Moor Angels and Biza and Wildlife Conservation Action, her NGO. This is northern Zimbabwe. And so a common activity with these kind of coexistence projects is to try and strengthen livestock corrals so that at night you put the livestock in there so that they're safe. This particular design of corral is mobile, so you can move it and use the cattle to fertilize fields and improve crop yields as well. And then so the livestock can't get out, and also lions can't jump in and kill livestock. So it's a really important intervention. This is another example of such a corral. This one is in the Okavango Delta. It was constructed by Claws Conservancy, who also work with local communities to improve herding, which means that the livestock are protected when they're in the field as well as in the corral at night. And then the third declaration of 3 is to unlock the value. So to ensure that local people derive benefits from living with lions and other wildlife. And there's a number of ways that we work to try and achieve this. So one is through the performance payments type approaches, where communities are rewarded for either adhering to conservation agreements or for the presence and diversity and abundance of wildlife on their land. So for example, Lion Landscapes works in the area around Ruaha National Park in southern Tanzania, and they have a conservation agreement with the communities there, and the communities receive a certain amount of funding each year based on the abundance and diversity of wildlife on their land. So basically, communities are being positioned and paid, rewarded for acting as custodians of the wildlife on behalf of the world. And so this means really positioning communities as partners in conservation rather than enemies in conservation, which has been that kind of traditional approach, which of course, as we all know, doesn't work. Another example of this kind of approach is in Kenya, where again, Lion Landscapes are experimenting with biodiversity credit type approach, which is similar, but whereby conservation investors invest in the purchase of biodiversity credits, the value of which can go up or down based on the conservation performance of the communities in question. And again, essentially positions communities as effective custodians of the nature. And then another important approach is to support the development of wildlife as a land use in suitable parts of the continent. This can be really important for communities in terms of diversifying livelihoods. And so helping communities establish conservancies and to support the governance and management of these areas can be a very effective approach. Another element that we've started to invest more heavily in recently is surveying and monitoring. When we started with the Lion Recovery Fund, we felt it was difficult to spend money on surveying of lions because it would come at it would compete with our efforts to put money into management and protection. But we've been partnered with by the Ayers Wildcat Conservation Trust, who very generously provided support specifically for surveying and monitoring. And I think this is actually a really significant addition for the LRF, because firstly, it enables us to assess the effectiveness of our investments. It enables grantees to adaptively manage. And also what we found, because the issue of targeted lion poaching for body parts is really emerging as a problem, you can have a well-managed area where lions disappear underneath the noses of the people managing the area. But if you're monitoring the lions, you have a really good grasp on what's going on, and you can help to prevent that kind of loss. So it's an important addition to our strategy. So now we're going to hear from Michael Kailo. Michael is a Kenyan Maasai pastoralist from the Maasai Mara area. He comes from a really impressive conservation family in Kenya, and is really becoming a very impressive conservationist in his own right. So over to you, Michael.
Michael, please unmute. We can't hear you right now.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Peter, for that introduction and the insight that you've already given. It's an absolute honor to be part of this discussion today and to talk to you about the work that we are doing at the Kenya Wildlife Trust. So as Peter said, I'm a Maasai, born and raised around the Maasai Mara, which I will show you a map later. And I grew up, as any pastoralist boy, looking after livestock and working working very closely with lions, and we have all sorts of issues that we've had when we were young. But as we grew up, I went to university and studied and came back to work with my people to make sure that we continue to conserve this wildlife. So I joined the Kenya Wildlife Trust, which is one of the most upcoming and promising organizations dealing with conserving lions. And I'll tell you a little bit about what we are doing in the Mara. And we started off in 2014 as two different projects, the Mara Cheetah Project and the Mara Lion Project. But then in 2018, we merged these two.
Sorry, Michael, tell me next slide, okay, when you need the slide.
Next, please. Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you. So the widespread concerns about the dwindling numbers of lions and cheetahs in the Mara that were declining made the Kenya Wildlife Trust to initiate the Mara Lion and Cheetah projects. That was back in 2013. And it is a donor non-profit organization that's donor reliant. And because of the concerns in the Mara, we merged these two programs. That's the Mara Cheetah and the Mara Lion projects to form what's a more sustainable and long-term program dealing with all the predators. And that's now why we have the Mara Predator Conservation Program. Next slide. So the three core objective areas that the Kenya Wildlife Trust is looking at is in establishing the lion and cheetah densities and trends over time. We are looking at what the numbers are, because if you go into any ecosystem, you want to understand what's there first. Then we're also looking at the threats that are facing these predators. And we have documented quite a number of threats. And the leading threat actually is human-wildlife conflict. And we also, third objective is we're engaging communities in conserving these predators and implementing some of the solutions that they have identified as a solution to resolving the threats that are facing these predators. Next. So just as a point of illustration, so we work in the southwestern part of Kenya in the Maasai Mara. So the map above shows Africa, and Kenya is the country that we are in. And that's our study area, approximately 3,000 square kilometers. So the dark green area is the Maasai Mara National Reserve, which is one of the 8 world wonders because of the wildebeest migration. And then the light green are community conservancies. These are areas where people have given land to be used for conservation. And then all those other circles that you're seeing, the Z1, Z, those are what we are calling the priority lands, lion conservation areas. So these are areas where humans settle, and there's also livestock, which is the primary livelihood around there. And so I would say that this is an ecosystem that's under a lot of pressure. And also it's one of the lion strongholds in Kenya. Next. So we use the we use SECR methodology to look at the lion numbers to identify. So we have 3 months of intensive monitoring where we go out to the field and take photographs of the lions to be able to estimate their densities. So we use whisker spots to identify and name each and every lion. And we only record lions above the age of 1 year, because they are the ones under 1 year have a higher mortality. So we have a database of more than 1,000 lions. And in the next slide, we'll see the numbers. Next slide. So over since we started in 2014, you can see the lion abundance numbers starting from 2014 to 2022. And actually right now we are in the middle of our intensive monitoring session. So those are the numbers. You see that we have about 500 lions in this ecosystem, which is quite impressive. Next. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, one of the major threats that we are dealing with is human-wildlife conflict. So the people who live here are predominantly pastoralists, keeping livestock such as cattle, sheep, and goat. And this close interaction between wildlife and livestock and people sometimes leads into conflict. Next. So one of the contributing factors is the kind of livestock enclosures, or what we call bomas. So people do use the locally available materials to construct bomas. Sometimes these materials are not reliable, and lions can easily jump into the livestock enclosures and kill livestock. And since this is a significant investment for the Maasai pastoralist, this sometimes lead into a lot of conflict and anger. Next slide. So we have started to work with communities to implement some of the strategies, because we realize that this depredation incidents sometimes leads to a lot of losses. So we have come up with some mitigation measures, such as construction of better livestock enclosures to make sure that livestock are safe at night. And also a lot of the harder trainings that we are conducting to make sure that those people who are looking after livestock during the day are well trained. Next. Next slide. Yeah. It's not only people who get affected in this conflict situation. People are also sometimes injured, and this leads into a lot of issues. But we are working closely with even government actors, such as rangers and Kenya Wildlife Service, to make sure that people are engaged and involved in the conservation efforts. Next. Next. Yeah, so because of these incidents that happen where livestock are killed, people are injured, sometimes this leads to retaliatory cases where people get angry and go out there and either kill lions or sometimes injure lions. So this is an example where a collared lion was speared to death, and the collar was attempted to be destroyed. But through the efforts of our lion ambassadors, who I'll talk more about shortly, we were able to recover that, and we were able to engage the community to understand the role that the lions are playing in this ecosystem. Next. So because of these significant challenges, we thought of a way to engage communities in conservation, to be part and parcel of ensuring that lions continue to survive in this ecosystem. So in 2020, we initiated the Lion Ambassadors Program, which I'll talk more about now. Next. So this is where our paths crossed with the Lion Recovery Fund, and they supported Kenya Wildlife Trust in initiating the Lion Ambassador Program. So in 2020, we employed 10 local community members to be part of our organization. And because of the impressive work that they were able to do, in 2021, that number increased to 15 Lion Ambassadors. And just recently, because of the work that we've been able to, or the impact that we've been able to make, we did an application to the Lion Recovery Fund, and we got even more funds to be able to push that number to 20 ambassadors, covering an area of about 1,680 kilometers squared, in terms of engaging communities in various activities geared towards lion conservation. And I'll talk about that now. Next. So the core objectives of this program is, one is conflict mitigation. As I said, conflict is a big issue in this ecosystem. So the Lion Ambassadors spend a lot of their time engaged in conflict mitigation work. So they support communities to understand what some of the strategies to prevent conflicts are. The second one is on community awareness. So they create a lot of awareness to try and make people to understand why we really need to have these lions beyond this generation. So they conduct household outreach to engage the adults, the children in conservation. And then thirdly is on data collection. So this data is crucial to inform policy. So they collect a lot of data during their daily patrols. And this data is what's used to come up with recommendations to advise communities, government agencies on what decisions needs to be taken to ensure that lions continue to thrive in this ecosystem. Next. So up to now, we have 15 Lion Ambassadors, and hopefully from this coming month, that number will go to 20. And they are very critical aspects of this program, because we cannot be in all the places all the time, but having eyes out there is a critical step for us to be able to engage communities in lion conservation. Next. So as I said, data collection, they use CyberTracker, which we have customized to be able to collect a lot of data. So data like on their daily patrols, they collect data on their sightings, they collect data on dead predators, they collect data on their communication with other stakeholders. Because as Kenya Wildlife Trust, we believe in partnerships and engaging people who are of common interests in lion conservation. So they do record all this data, and this data is collected into one database, which is analyzed to be able to give information to influence policy. Next. So what are some of the key achievements that these ambassadors have been able to achieve in the 3 years that we've now been working with them? So in the next slide. So because we are a conservation organization and we depend on funds from well-wishers, it is important to invest these resources in areas where we feel there's a lot of conflicts. So the data that the ambassadors are collecting are key to influence where these resources are invested. So for instance, if it's construction of bomas, we use data to be able to determine the areas that are the conflict hotspots. And this is where we allocate resources such as the bomas, the lion deterrent lights, the poison response trainings, among others. Next. So awareness is a critical component in engaging communities in conservation. So for instance, there's a big disconnect between the investments that are made in the tourism industry and the existence of lions. So it's critical for the lion ambassadors to be able to make people understand that the tourism industry, which is a major driver of the economy, is actually driven by the presence of these predators. And thus, it is important for conservancies to continue to thrive. We need these lions. So that gap is bridged by the ambassadors through creation of awareness. Next. Yeah, so because of these interventions that we are now implementing, because of this knowledge that's being shared, we've seen tolerance in terms of when people lose livestock or when people get injured. So in the past, there was situations where if somebody, say, loses a sheep or a goat, they would either go out there and poison that predator or probably even spear it. But because of this awareness that's being created, because of the mitigation strategies that Kenya Wildlife Trust is implementing, we've seen an increase in tolerance in terms of tolerating losses from predators and being able to tolerate even lions using the non-protected areas per se. Next. Yeah, and the other achievement is because of this connection now, there's tolerance, there's benefits, and there's these mitigation strategies that are put in place. We have now seen people more willing to lease their lands to conservancies to allow these lions to roam freely. And so we've seen situations where people approach conservancies or conservancies management to request for their land to be leased under the conservancy. So because people now realize that we need these lions now and for generations to come. Next. And I say Ashe Oleng, which means thank you so much in Maasai.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. So yeah, in summary, so just to close, lions, as you can tell, occur in a wide range of circumstances, and they require a correspondingly wide diversity of approaches to achieve effective conservation. We've got a super exciting array of projects in the pipeline remaining for 2023. Our fundraising goal for the remainder of the year is to raise a minimum of an additional $3 million for the remainder of the year. And that seems like a lot, but I think you've seen the scope of the Lion Recovery Fund. It's an enormous task that we try to undertake to support lion conservation across the continent. And also significantly small amounts of funding are pooled to enable us to do big things. But as you can see, there are some quite important interventions. I've given some examples related to the kind of work that that Michael has alluded to in terms of the cost of some of these things. And so you can see that once it's broken down, relatively small contributions or even proportions of those costs can go a long way towards making a significant and tangible difference on the ground. So the LRF has, the feedback we get from our grantees is that LRF funding is uniquely valuable. We try to be low red tape, low bureaucracy, nimble, quick moving, and flexible. For example, particularly with some of our smaller grantees, we're starting to issue unrestricted grants where the funding is restricted to outcomes rather than budget lines. And as a result of these kind of innovations, we're getting feedback that LRF funding could be worth as much as 10 times that of institutional funding, dollar for dollar, as a result. So I just want to say to every single one of you who supported the LRF and those of you who are considering it, thank you very much. And thank you so much for listening and attending this presentation. We appreciate it. Over to you, GJ.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael and Peter, for sharing your experiences with us and for all the hard work that you do for lions and communities across Africa. And I want to thank again all the people who are listening in, especially today in celebration of World Lion Day. It's wonderful to have this chance to catch up and learn about lions. So we've got a few more minutes for questions, probably about 12, 13 minutes for some questions that I've seen come through. Try to keep your answers relatively short so that we can get through as many questions as possible. And if we don't get to them, we apologize, but you could always send them to us by email and our team can make sure that we respond to your questions. I think I'll start with a relatively simple one for you, Michael. Tammy was wondering if it is really true that you can identify each lion by their different patterns of their whisker holes. So can you confirm that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the lion whisker spots are just like our thumbprints. So they are unique for each lion. So that's what the most reliable way of identifying lions. Although we use a combination of more than one way of identifying them. So we use things like tear marks. We use facial marks. We also use the face profile. We use broken teeth sometimes. And we use also, sometimes you find that there's maybe a lion that has a missing one eye. So we use a combination of all these methodologies to be able to identify a lion. So yeah, it's true. You can use the whisker spots. Thank you.
I think I'll stick around a little bit with you, Michael. There's a question from Elizabeth about human-wildlife conflict, noting that the Maasai have been living in the eastern savanna since centuries and have coexisted with lions. So she's wondering why you think, and according to your experience, why is human-wildlife and especially lion human conflict reaching such a climax in the region at the moment?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. So in the Mara right now, as I said, we have a lot of pressure that's brought about by competing land uses. We have a population that's said to be doubling every 9 years. And that brings about, a need for more land for settlement, a need for more resources, like more livestock. And that puts pressure on the land, and as well as brings people and lions more closely. And obviously, with that kind of pressure and more frequent interactions, that leads to conflict. So that's why now we are seeing much more conflicts than there were before, because the population of livestock, of people is increasing over time.
Right. Next, I think that ties to a series of questions, which I'll invite both you and Peter to comment on. There's a point made about the decisions that happened at the Montreal conference last year, the Conference of the Parties for the Convention of Biodiversity. And one of the declarations for that conference was a commitment to protect 30% of our land and water spaces by 2030. To what extent do you think this commitment, the 30 by 30 commitment, is going to affect lion conservation in the years to come? And I think I'll tie this question also to what you see as opportunities, maybe for more corridors being established across different lionscapes or lion areas. Maybe Peter, you can start us off, and then we'll turn it over to Michael.
Yeah, thanks, GJ. So I think the 30 by 30 goal is an exciting one. It's important to note that some of the key range states have already exceeded that proportion of land under protection through a combination of state protected areas and community conservation areas and so forth. And that's, for countries that are developing, with a lot of competing developmental needs, it's a huge sacrifice. A lot of the land is has a very high opportunity cost. And I think that, we really need to help African governments and communities protect the land that is already under existence for conservation. Tanzania, Botswana, Zambia, Mozambique, for example, all have very high proportions of their land under conservation, as do many other range states. But having said that, there is still a very big opportunity through community conservation approaches, like the ones that Michael alluded to increase the area under conservation for the benefit of the host countries and communities. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think the goal and the focus on reaching and sustaining that target is going to be very important for lions, because if we're not on the ball, I think we could slip backwards in terms of percent coverage.
Right. And I think too, the other thing I'd add to that is that there's an important role for private philanthropy to play in contributing to our efforts to financially support the cost of protecting 30% of our lands and seas. And so this is where all of you play a really critical role, in addition to what governments and large mega donors kind of contribute towards. If I can add one more to this line of questioning, have you seen, either you, Peter, or Michael, any signs of inbreeding in lion population as a result of a fragmentation of habitat? And I'll go back to this question, therefore, of corridors and what role you see for corridors in that context. Maybe we'll start with Michael to see if he's seen this in the Mara, and then over to Peter.
Yeah, so in the Mara, we have not yet seen that sort of inbreeding happening. We still have quite a number of lions, as I alluded earlier, and there's an actual risk of that happening. It's not yet, but there's an actual risk, especially with the fragmentation. This is a critical question because the fragmentation of the land and also lack of these corridors may actually play a role in increasing the chances of inbreeding happening. So we have in the Mara right now, we have a few challenges which are actually making this even more real. There's a challenge of fences which are coming up near protected areas. There's also another challenge of settlements, unplanned settlements. And these actually may actually separate lion populations, and that may accelerate the chances of inbreeding happening. So there's a need for investments in terms of securing these corridors and also ensuring that these fences do not come up rapidly, which may actually be a problem in the future for lions.
Great. Peter, do you want to share some of your observations, maybe beyond the geography of the Mara?
Yeah, so inbreeding hasn't been a particularly significant problem yet for lions. I think, in the Ngorongoro crater, the genetic diversity apparently is relatively low, but that's actually because of the unique geography of the area, which restricts movement. But so far, it hasn't been a particularly big issue, but absolutely can become a big issue when populations get very small. Thankfully, it's a problem that could be relatively easily fixed by augmenting populations, assuming that you deal with the reasons that lion populations have declined already.
Okay, thank you. I'll stick a little bit with the Mara ecosystem. There's a question from Elizabeth to Michael, noting that there's been a number of papers in the past 10 years or so describing the rise of agriculture and irrigation projects as major threats to that ecosystem. What are your observations about that, and what are your comments about how these kinds of projects, agriculture, irrigation, affect lions and cheetahs?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. So in the Mara, yes, I say we are increasingly seeing competing land uses, and agriculture is one of them. And this, for agriculture to happen in such an ecosystem, one of the things that must be done is fences must be put in to keep off the elephants and other predators. And in the Mara, one of the things we've seen is an increased number of calls to our program to come and remove lions from fences. So sometimes, lions can stray into agricultural lands, and that threatens either the livestock that is being kept in there, or even people. So we've seen an increase in calls of people saying, hey, come take the lions out of the fences and things like that. We've also seen some lions that actually have gone into the fences and kind of, been able to establish their small corridors where they move within those fenced ecosystems. So that this competing land uses serves to actually cut lions off from their prides, and it's actually a big issue.
Great, thank you, Michael. I see a couple of clarifying questions I want to try to get to quickly. Sylvia was wondering what the peak of lions was in one of the graphs you showed, Michael. I think it was 2020, if I can't quite remember, but you showed a graph with lions and there was a peak in it. Does that ring a bell? Can you provide some clarification?
Yeah, so it's actually, so I was just asking my colleague the same question. And you see, if you look at that, that was at the peak of the COVID season, where there was very little tourism happening in the Mara. There was, obviously, the lions had also started to come out in big numbers. And also, it was also during the period of the migration, where a large number of the young sub-adults were following the migration from the Serengeti. So it was a nexus of, there was a lot of factors that contributed to that. So the Mara was quite calm at that time. There was not a lot of tourism activities. And so our teams were able to patrol more and be able to get more lions sighted at that period.
Great, thank you. I apologize, I'm not going to have time to get through all the questions. So please feel free to send them to us and we'll try to get the panelists to answer them offline. But I just see a question that's really fascinating from Priscilla that I think is really important to raise. So maybe Peter, you can answer that briefly. That community conservation approaches are really wonderful. But what about coupling those with capacity building and students who are usually managers of those protected areas in the future? Because without any field experience, those young people usually don't have a grasp of the situation and not necessarily the passion to conserve wildlife. The question just disappeared from underneath me. But I think you get the gist, Peter, and I know that's a topic that we regularly talk about. So could you comment on that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Priscilla, and thanks for attending. I think that's absolutely critically important. So we do try, a lot of the LRF grants have kind of capacity building components tied within them. And then, we toyed a lot with the idea of actually having some kind of internship type program associated with the LRF. But in our discussions, we decided it was probably best positioned within WCN more broadly. And so WCN's got a really substantive effort around kind of capacity building in conservation. So we try and do it within LRF grants, but there are also opportunities within broader WCN, but they're absolutely critical. Gigi, I just wanted to also acknowledge my colleague from Zimbabwe, Rose Mandisodza, who attended. Hello, Rose. She said thanks for the efforts that we're doing, but I also want to say thanks for the efforts you're doing. Rose represents the Zim Parks Wildlife Management Authority. Zimbabwe has a stable or possibly even growing lion population, and so thanks very much for the work you're doing in our country.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Rose. I also want to thank Michael Samari, who I think is one of the lion ambassadors, was able to join. I'm sure there are plenty of people who joined who are on the front line of conservation, without whom this doesn't happen. And it's a true partnership between the folks on the front lines and people who are trusting their good work and sending funds to do it. I really apologize for closing this conversation now. If you want to learn more, feel free to connect with us or connect with Michael or Peter. Thank you so much, Michael and Peter, for sharing your experiences with us. I want to thank all the people on the call, especially in honor of World Lion Day today. As a reminder, there's no gift too small, no gift too big to support the impressive work of all the grantees, like the Kenya Wildlife Trust. 100% of the funds that are received ultimately get granted out to projects like the ones that Michael presented. or the many other examples that Peter mentioned. You can donate via our donate link. Visit the www.wildnet.org/donate, select the Lion Recovery Fund. And I think you've seen through this presentation the impact that your contributions have. And it's a very ambitious goal that the Lion Recovery Fund has for making sure that lions and people can coexist and thrive. There are plenty of opportunities to invest more and to sustain and expand the conservation successes that we have had to date. It's really inspiring and hopeful to hear from people like Michael and all the other grantees, and to see the important work that they do in Kenya and Zimbabwe and elsewhere. So that message of hope really resonates with me, especially today. And I hope that you can all be a part of our ongoing journey. We are here to help answer any questions. You can sign up for news update. You can join us in person in San Francisco for the Expo on Friday, October 13th. And if you are in the Bay Area in the United States, or are willing to come out and see us, it's a wonderful time to connect with conservationists. And I will leave the last word to Michael and then to Peter to close us out. So Michael, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for supporting the work that the Lion Recovery Fund is doing, and also in turn supporting the work that we do here with the people in Kenya, and being able to save the future for lions and people. So in Kenya Wildlife Trust, we have 3 Ps. We have people, predators, and partnerships. So we are honored today to be able to be part of this celebration and be part of the future for lions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Peter, last word to you.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Yeah, thank you everyone who's attended. We really appreciate it. As GJ said, no gift too small or too large. The LRF operates at scale, so we could really process huge quantities of funding if we had it. Massively grateful to everyone who supported us and for everyone for attending. Thank you very much. And also to all of our grantees and the amazing work they do. Thanks, GJ.
Great. Thank you all. Happy World Lion Day, and take care, everyone.